through a set of circumstances, I went as a counselor for the BJE Teen March of the Living, and I stepped onto the grounds of Auschwitz in 2005. And everything I had learnt was true, but it wasn't real. Because you see, the vision that we had learnt was the Holocaust happened in black and white, right? All the pictures you saw of the corpses that were taken by the Nazis and of the lives of the Jewish people were in black and white. Except the myth of all of that is that it happened in living color. The Holocaust happened in living color, and you cannot understand this journey as the journey of 6 million people. You have to understand it as one person at a time. One brother, one sister, one mother, and one child who grew up in Czechoslovakia and whose life was disrupted when somebody knocked on the door and told her parents that they had lost their factory. So what I'd like to do today, and just by way of introduction, this is the story of one person, of Eva. And I'm standing here as a witness to the story, because I have had the privilege, and I will have the privilege in April of 2023, of walking into the grounds of Auschwitz for the 18th time. I have way more questions than I have answers. But what I do want everybody to understand is, sitting in this room, is the importance of becoming witnesses. A survey was done in 2020 across the United States. 67% of Americans did not know that 6 million Jews were murdered in Auschwitz. And 3% of that survey actually believed the Jews caused the Holocaust. So there are lots of battles in front of us. But the worst battle happened between 1939 and 1945. And I am a witness to the witnesses. And I thank you for being here today to hear Eva's story so that you can become witnesses. Because I'm going to ask you to consider in April or any other time coming on a journey like this so that we can tell the souls who were murdered. In a place called Birkenau, 1.5 million people were murdered through the gates of hell. 232,000 of them were children, that we didn't forget them. So I'm going to ask Eva a few questions, and then we'll open it up, and then I'll be happy, and Barbara can share with you an itinerary that we're actually put together for people who are interested in going with Adat Ariel on March of the Living, because it is true, as Barbara said, it was started for teens. But since 1988, we've had parents and adults saying, my kid has come back from this trip transformed, and I want that same experience. I want to be able, and Elke's nodding her head because Elke went on this program, and it is a program that changes you. The rabbi talked about perspective. My perspective has really changed. And this is a trip about assuming a role so that Eva's father, who was murdered somewhere in Auschwitz, that we can tell her that when we step in the grounds there on April 18th, when 10,000 people march from Auschwitz to Birkenau, that we did not and we will not forget Eva's father, who was buried there amongst the ash. So Eva, can I ask you to tell a little bit about where you were born and a little bit about your life before the war?
First of all, I wanted to say Chag Sameach to all of you, and thank you for coming and listening my story and what's going on in the world. So I was born in Czechoslovakia, and as you know, Czechoslovakia, many of you travel a lot, so you know Prague or Slovak Bratislava. Around 30 years ago, the Czechoslovakia separated, the Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. I am from the Slovak Republic, where the capital city is the Bratislava. Family was very established in my city, and I had lots of family, uncles and cousins. My parents and my grandparents, they were established, and all they had, my grandparents, they had their different business, and my parents had different business. Life was very good. I had one older brother, Arthur, Simcha, and wonderful, wonderful parents and loving parents. My mother didn't work, but she had beautiful voice. Many times I say to myself, I wish I would inherited her voice, but I guess we have to be satisfied whenever we have. I attended kindergarten. My brother is 2 years older, so he went to school. He attended school. And one day, I came home crying. It was around 1942. And my mother asked, what happened? Why are you crying? So I said, my friends, they didn't want to play with me. My mother said, you have cousin and you have brothers, you know, play with them. Things started to change drastically. And one day, knocking on the door, and two Slovak, I call them fascists, they came to my parents, and it was announced anyway to all the public. Then everybody who owns the businesses, we have to give up the businesses. So my father said, you know, I work all my life, why should I give away my business? That's the law. Every time different law came, and we have to respect this, I think so. And then, again, a couple of months later, the new law came again, the knocking on the door, you take few suitcases, and you have to meet in certain place. I'm just telling you very briefly, okay, because Moning wants to talk about the traveling. So we pack few things, and we meet at this place. There were lots of people already there, Jewish people, of course, waiting. They packed us in the buses, and they drove us to the station, and again, packed us in these wagons. They drove us. When there is no, you cannot ask any question, because nobody listens, and you don't get the answer. We arrived in the city called Žilina, which is in Slovak. And when we came out from the wagons, there was lots of people. And then immediately they separate us. Children separate, female and men separate. I was crying. I was 4.5 years old. So I was, you know, always next to my mother. I always say next to my mother's skirt. I was crying, and I didn't want to leave my mother. So then the police, the German, again, Slovak, because that time it was still Slovak, they pushed my mother away, and I had no choice. So the children came to me, and they said, don't cry, and we will stay with you, and we will do something together. They put us in the small room, 12 children in the room. There was hardly any place for anybody to sleep, so some of us, we slept on the floor. Life was miserable, it was terrible, and you couldn't say anything. And you know, Czechoslovakia has 4 seasons. So there was winter time, and snow, cold, and many times during the night, there were whistle blowing, and put something come on you, and out, out, out. So lots of children came with their frozen feet, because they even didn't have time to put their shoes. My mother once in a while came to visit, and that was a very happy occasion, of course. One day she said, dress something warm and I will come and we will talk. So instead of talking, she came and apparently my grandmother, who was there with us, of course, she brought with her gold, and she bribed the soldier who was there. There were many of them, but in this long time, she developed kind of communication with this one soldier, and she bribed him, and she told him then she will give him gold or money if he will help us to get away from this camp. Later, we find out this soldier was a Jewish guy. So apparently there were some Jewish soldiers who were working over there. So my mother, my brother, and I, and my grandmother, this soldier arranged everything for us, and we left. We left Žilina. And we came to this country, and there was this young Christian couple who took us, and meanwhile, the soldier, he arranged everything for us. So we had Christian paper, and my mother and my grandmother, they started to work on their farm because they were farmers. And life was different because we had food and we had place where to sleep. So it was pretty okay, right? Knocking on the door, the 2-3 soldiers came looking for my mother. Then she's a partisan. My mother said, I'm not a partisan. They took my mother. They held her for 2 weeks. And when she came back, it was a happy occasion, right? But even as an adult, we never asked my mother, what happened to you during these 2 weeks? Never questioned her. But situation said my mother when she came, we cannot stay here because it's dangerous. So where are we going? She asked the owner if he can take us to the mountain. Czechoslovakia is a beautiful country. As I mentioned before, I am sure many of you traveled to Czechoslovakia, so you know it's beautiful. There is beautiful mountains, there is beautiful places. So the very close where we stay in this village, there was the mountains. So my mother said, take us to these mountains. We arrived to these mountains. Of course, he agreed to take us. So we arrived to the mountains. And there was already partisan and lots of Jewish people. So they prepared us to sleep on the floor, okay, and then there was the food, because people were donating the food. But they told us, don't get very comfortable because you never know when the German men arrive. That's what happened. Germans surprised us and surprised also the soldiers. So some of them, they fled, some of them, they stayed. The Germans took us to the wagons again, to the cars, and they drove us to another city. We find out there is another working camp. So, but the life was different because this place was there in Czechoslovakia. Every boy or man, 18 years old, has to go to the army, not like here, okay? Over there is the law. If you go to study, if you study university or higher, you finish and then you go to the army. So this place, there were lots of buildings for the soldiers. But when the situation with the Jewish people started, so they moved the soldiers away, and this place was for the Jewish people. So, but they had a factory also over there. My mother and my grandmother and lots of people, they were working in this factory. They build the furniture, they make the drapes, different stuff. We children we had already some schooling, and we were waiting for the end of the war, okay? So we came out, many times we stay outside, and it was already May, not April 1945, lots of army, lots of airplanes. It was so much commotion, okay? Meanwhile, lots of people during the staying over there tried to escape. So, of course, they got shot. Some of them who got sick, they took them immediately away. And life was difficult. And when we play outside, I said to my brother, look, Arthur, there is a silver birds. I called, this was already American airplanes, lots of them. And so we, under the table, we were hiding. And student make the movie, and the title, The Silver Birds. So I have the CDs, and it's called Silver Birds. In May 1945, war ended. But we couldn't travel anywhere because everything was demolished, so we still had to wait. Then finally, we were able to travel. My mother took us, and we went to Bratislava, looking for my family and my father. So when she arrived to this place, everybody was writing their name, missing person. And when she put my father's name, Ernest Juskovic, there was a man not too far from her, and he noticed the name. He said, introduced himself, and he said, I used to see your father. Excuse me, I'm so nervous about this when I'm speaking of my father. When I saw the name, and this is your husband, I saw him just towards the end of the war. So where did you see him? My mother got so excited. Where did you see him? Unfortunately, in Auschwitz, like said, in Auschwitz. So we decided to come home. When we arrived home, everything was burned down to the ground. The whole city was burned down to the ground. I don't have not one whole picture of my father. Have picture when I was 3 years old, something, and I was holding my father, and have kind of like, I don't know why, it's half of a picture. So everything burned down, okay? Houses, furniture, everything. So we left with nothing. So then my mother decided to go to the next city, and she went to work. I went to school, my brother went to school, and my grandmother was housekeeping, and that's how we started a new life. That time, the woman didn't work. It's not like today, everybody is working who wants to work. That time, women didn't work, and my mother was not used to it, right? But she had no choice because she had to support us, and there was no welfare. There is no welfare. So life was very miserable. And I always cry, and I said, when I will get a job, all my money will go to my mother, because I felt so sorry for my mother. She struggled a lot, she worked hard, it was very hard. Anyway, I graduated from the economy school. My brother, when he was 13, decided to go to Israel. In 1949, Israel in 1949 was not like today Israel. Everybody, lots of you know, it was very hard. He went to the school, and he went to the army. He got wounded, and then he learned the profession. He built a house. So I always say, and I'm so proud, my brother built Ashkelon. Many of you know Ashkelon, right? It's a beautiful city. He was very successful. Anyway, so as I said, I graduated. I got the job immediately. I was working. Then I got married. And we had son Peter. And in 1968, Russia invaded Czechoslovakia. we had wonderful life before, okay? When I got married, we had a beautiful house, furniture, car, everything, comfort. We closed the door, left everything behind, take suitcase, and left as a tourist. We had passport to Europe, so we could travel. We came to Vienna, Austria. There we registered with the HIAS. And 7 months later, we got visa to come to United States. So we arrived to Los Angeles in 1969. Very hard. No language and no money, okay? So my husband, thank God, he had a very good profession. He got the job immediately after 3 weeks or something, so I call immediately. And Peter went to school, and I went to work too. And in the evening, we learned English. We went to Fairfax High School, and life was started to build, okay? Then after 2 years, when we could afford, we invited my mother. Meanwhile, my mother went to see her son, she didn't see for 20 years, and then she traveled between Israel and Los Angeles, 2 years here and 2 years in Israel. Then she got sick, and she wanted to be buried in Israel, so she's buried also in Ashkelon. And my son, make a long story short, he passed away, unfortunately. I always say this is my Holocaust. We had only one son, Peter, and he passed away. My husband also. And I retired. I was working all my life. Then I decided to retire, and I didn't know what to do, so I took I always like art, so I took some art classes 1 semester. And today you hear Rabbi Schuldenfrei, thank you. He surprised me. I was so pleasantly surprised when he announced this and announced my paintings. This is only as a hobby. I just studied 1 semester, and he apparently liked my pictures, so I appreciate it. It was a wonderful feeling, you know, and I felt so good after he spoke so beautifully. So when I retired, I also started some introduced me to Los Angeles Museum, if I would be interested to speak over there. So I agree. So before the pandemic, I spoke regularly. Then I spoke different schools. I was invited to speak different schools, different temples, Los Angeles Valley, UCLA, regularly at UCLA 4 or 5 times a year. I speak over there. And as I said, different school and temple. And I spoke 7 or 8 months ago here in this temple. Many of you probably saw me or hear me speaking. So I just wanted to thank you for listening. And I wish you all the happy, healthy, and everything best in life. Thank you for listening.
No, but don't go yet. Because we're going to open up the floor to questions. But as I said, you know, Elie Wiesel famously said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. And we really are the last generation who are going to hear from the witnesses. And I believe, Ava, in listening and speaking with you in the past, 80% of your family were murdered. And so now it is our legacy to keep telling the story. And going back to Leon, who started the first discussion today, I'm going to maybe put you on the spot a little bit and ask you, do you believe in God? And did the Holocaust change your belief?
It's a tough question. Many students, they ask the same question. You know, when you are a child, your life is completely different when you are adults. Before the war, my parents were religious, Orthodox. My grandparents, even more than my parents, but still it was religious. And my grandparents, They had the Torah in their house. They were really very Orthodox. During the war, things changed. And when I saw my mother, who she kind of lost faith, she really did, because she lost her husband and her sister and brother-in-law and cousin. 80%, like you said, 80% family losing. She lost faith. So then when I grew up, all my friends were Christian Catholic, because there was no youngster my age who survived the war in my city where we used to live. So I tried to be like they are, and life was difficult. It was really difficult. So when I got married, my husband, his family was Orthodox, religious. My husband was not very much religious, but we kept kosher. We went to the temple, and when we came to United States, our son went to Hebrew Yavna school, so we belonged to Shaarei Tefillah in Los Angeles, which is Orthodox shul, and slowly started to believe in God, to answer your question. But when I lost my son, things was very difficult for me. I just couldn't explain to you, because only parents who lose their child can understand. For 4 years, I couldn't pronounce even his name. It was very hard on me. It was very hard. And then I spoke with a rabbi, and he said, he kind of brought me to believe in God again. And that's how, I started to go to the temple. And so I believe in God.
Thank you. Okay, I can obviously ask lots of questions, but I'd like to turn it over to anybody in the audience who would like to ask Ava a question.
Or you.
Or me, but you're more important than I am right now.
It's just, just curious, since you lived so long in communist Czechoslovakia, what kind of organized religious life was there under the communists? Were you in Bratislava or you were in Košice?
No, I was born in Košice,
okay, so
which is now the second largest city in Slovak Republic. But then we live in the small city called Sečovce. And there was no rabbi, there was not too much. When we wanted to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, we always went to Košice, the big city.
But under the communists,
yes.
But under the communists,
there was the communists, yes. But we did go to celebrate the the main holidays.
Okay, so your grandparents, what did they speak to each other? Slovak or Hungarian?
Oh, they spoke Slovak and Yiddish and Hungarian. And so my mother, when I learned a little bit Hungarian, when they spoke, my mother and my grandmother, because my grandmother, she lived with us, she was the balabusta, okay? She was the head of the household, my grandmother. She was always, she was very smart lady, and sometimes she criticized my mother, and I didn't like it. So I always said, Mother, why are you allowed, your mother to telling you what to do? And she always said to me, what, don't say anything, please. She always said, please don't say anything. So, yeah, they spoke different languages.
Hi. I used to have conversations with one of my relatives that was a survivor. And they took her, she was Hungarian from Budapest, and her story seemed kind of similar to your mother's, except they didn't have kids yet. They had been married a week when they took her husband away, and she never saw him again. And she was put in Auschwitz, but There was a question I always wanted to ask her, I could never bring myself to ask, which was, I'm going to ask you, how there must have been afterwards many things that were triggering to you. How did you deal with the anger, your anger, when you would look back on like what happened to your mother, or, you know, just the whole situation? How did you deal with that when that would happen?
You know, it's never easy, because when you are suffering, and this is, I call suffering, because when you lose the father and family, so from the whole family, you know, you lost, you left with almost, you know, brother and mother and grandmother. That's all. This was the whole family. You know, you live always under pressure and always thinking, why does it happen to us? What went wrong? Why people didn't fight? You know, why they didn't kill Hitler? But there is no answer. And you know what? For some years, I studied psychiatry a little bit, so I tried to kind of like my anger correct, if you may say, but it never was easy. It never was easy, and you have no choice. You know, like some person said to me, Eva, there are two choices. You live or you die. So I choose to live, apparently. But it's very hard. It's very hard.
Eva, I know you said that, I know you said that when you were younger in school, how you were treated by the other kids. I guess twofold question. First is, were you called like derogatory names other than them saying they didn't want to play with you? Mm-hmm. And two, your teachers, did you feel like you were segregated or certainly treated a lot differently than the other kids by the adults or by the teachers?
You know, I must say about my teacher, it was very objective. You know, I had, well, apparently she likes me or so, because I was always quiet. And children, you know, sometimes children, they can be very mean. So they call me, why did you want to play with me? Because I was, in Slovak, they say Žid, okay? Oh, I'm sorry. So they call me, you know, you Žid. And so I figured out, you know, it's something wrong, because they were my best friend. What is the reason, you know, they call me this name, and why they are, you know, laughing and separate from me. So it was very unpleasant. That's why, you know, as I mentioned, I came home crying, and my mother said, you know, don't play with them, but in a short time, things started to be very, very hard in Slovak. So my mother even said, you know, she didn't allow me to go to continue in the kindergarten. So I stay home. But the things rapidly was worse and worse for the all Jewish people and the all children, of course.
We'll take one more question. Do we have a question?
Yeah, Barbara.
Oh, okay.
Is it upsetting for you when you come up to speak about what happened to you? Is that upsetting for you? And if it is, how do you like deal with that and overcome that when you speak?
Okay, honestly, she invited me, okay? Monise called me 10 days ago, and she announced, you know, Eva, I am going to speak about the March of the Living, and please, I want you to be my guest. So I said, I spoke like 7 or 8 months ago, right here in the temple. I said to her, I spoke, but she said, I'd like you to come. So here I am. And I'm always, to be honest, I always say it's unfortunate what person, has to go through as a child. It's, what, nobody should know this. And that's why I'm so much against the war. I'm so much against, because the war is bad for everybody. Only maybe in the government they wanted to have war, but for the human being, the war is disaster, and I am very much against the war. And
So I began by telling you that I'd learned about the Holocaust, and until I actually went to Poland and stepped on the sacred and holy and blood-soaked places, did I understand the enormity of this journey. And I think that we are privileged to hear a witness because it is becoming harder and harder to hear from people. And I think one of the things Carmi talked about, what she learned from Rabbi Schuldenfrei today, and this trip over the last 2 decades has taught me perspective. What's really important, and what is our responsibility to the people who were murdered. I'm going to end by showing you a picture that sits on my desk. This is a picture taken in an extermination camp called Majdanek. They have there just rows and rows of shoes. And if anybody has gone to Auschwitz, and I hope, this is my plug, I will tell you right now, that in April of 2023, Adat Ariel is doing a March of the Living Adat Ariel delegation. And we have information and my cell phone, and I am able to, and I do text. I can't do TikTok, but I can text. I would like you to consider to come on this journey. There are many reasons not to come on this journey, but there are 6 million reasons why you should. And one of them is the shoe. You see, this shoe, if you look at your shoes that you're wearing today, thought went into, is it comfortable? Did you like the shape? Did you like the color? When you come into Auschwitz, there's a room full of shoes.
and hair.
And hair. Because people thought they were going to a work camp. So if you can imagine a mother buying or a father buying for their child their shoes, because they thought they were going on a journey. And they got to the camp and their shoes was taken away from them. There are 8,000 shoes in Auschwitz that are currently disintegrating. And the International March of the Living was approached by the foundation of Auschwitz and Birkenau to save the shoes. And that's what we're doing right now, because we couldn't save the people, but we can save some kind of memento, some kind of thought that went into them when they came into that hellhole, so that one day, my 2.5-year-old grandson, Milo, will walk into Auschwitz knowing what happened and preserving memories. So we heard it today from a witness who I am incredibly grateful to. I'm incredibly grateful to you for becoming witnesses, and I am going to implore you to think about coming to Poland, if it's not now, at some point, so that we can really go to Auschwitz and tell Ava's father that we will never, ever forget him. Gamar Khatima, and thank you, Ava, very much for sharing this.
Thank you so much. A great big thank you to Ava Trenk for being here to tell us her story, which is so